Michael Jackson's childhood began in the small industrial city of Gary, Indiana, a place defined by factories, modest homes, and the struggle of working-class families to make ends meet. He was the seventh of 9 children in the Jackson household, and life in such a large family was filled with both warmth and challenges. His father, Joseph Jackson, worked long hours at the steel mills, a difficult and exhausting job, yet he carried within him an unyielding desire to lift his family out of poverty. Music became the vehicle he believed could achieve that dream, and he turned his household into a training ground where discipline and ambition ruled above all else. From the earliest years, Michael showed qualities that set him apart from his siblings. While the other children displayed their own talents, Michael's voice carried a clarity and emotional depth that belied his age. He could pick up melodies quickly, and his natural sense of rhythm allowed him to move with an ease and grace that mesmerized anyone watching. Even before he understood the concept of performance, he had the ability to captivate a room. His father recognized this spark and began placing him at the forefront of the group that would eventually become the Jackson 5. The training was relentless. Joseph Jackson believed that success required sacrifice, and so rehearsals were strict, structured, and often harsh. The children practiced after school late into the evening, and every mistake was met with stern correction. For Michael, these sessions were exhausting, but they were also formative. The intensity forged resilience and determination, qualities that would later carry him through some of the most demanding phases of his career. At the same time, the pressure created an undercurrent of fear and stress that shadowed his early years. Behind the polished smiles on stage, the children endured a regime that few outsiders could imagine. Despite the strict environment, Michael's natural joy for music never dimmed. He absorbed the sounds of Motown, rhythm and blues, soul and gospel, and he carried those influences into his practice sessions. He would imitate the records he heard, perfecting not just the notes, but the emotions behind them. He danced around the living room, copying the moves of James Brown and Jackie Wilson, blending their energy with his own youthful exuberance. His mother, Katherine Jackson, provided a softer influence, encouraging his love for music with patience and understanding. She nurtured his spiritual side, instilling in him a sense of faith and compassion that balanced the severity of his father's methods. By the time Michael was 5 years old, his role within the Jackson 5 had become undeniable. When the group performed at local talent shows, it was his charisma and stage presence that drew the loudest applause. He sang with a conviction that startled audiences, as if a much older soul resided within his small frame. His movements were instinctive, flowing with rhythm and expression, turning each performance into a miniature spectacle. Audiences could hardly believe such maturity came from a child so young. Winning local competitions became routine, and word of the Jackson 5 began to spread beyond Gary. Life at home, however, was far from glamorous. The Jacksons lived in a small house where space was scarce and privacy was almost non-existent. 9 children shared rooms, and every corner of the house seemed to be filled with noise, laughter, arguments, and the constant hum of practice sessions. Michael grew accustomed to this chaos, learning to find his voice within the crowded household. These conditions shaped his resilience, teaching him how to stand out in a sea of voices and personalities. School presented another layer of challenge. Michael often felt different from his classmates, not only because of his growing involvement in music, but also because of his personality. He was shy and reserved when away from the stage, a stark contrast to the confident persona he projected in performances. Teachers noticed his quiet demeanor, but when asked to sing, he would transform completely, astonishing peers and adults alike. This duality, quiet and withdrawn in private, magnetic and lifelike in public, began to define him even at a young age. As the Jackson 5 gained recognition, Michael's childhood grew increasingly unusual compared to that of other children his age. Weekends and evenings were consumed with rehearsals, performances, and local tours. While his peers played outside, Michael was on stage under bright lights, singing and dancing with a professionalism far beyond his years. This sacrifice stripped away much of the innocence of childhood, yet it also provided him with experiences and lessons that would form the foundation of his career. He learned discipline, showmanship, and the art of connecting with an audience long before most children understood such concepts. The small stages of Indiana soon gave way to larger opportunities. Local promoters invited the Jackson 5 to perform in neighboring cities, and the family piled into a van, traveling to wherever an audience awaited. Michael experienced the thrill of hearing applause from strangers, the rush of adrenaline that came from stepping into the spotlight, and the satisfaction of seeing his father's dream inch closer to reality. Each performance strengthened his confidence and sharpened his skills, slowly transforming the shy boy into a commanding performer. And although his father's methods were often harsh, they instilled in Michael an unshakable work ethic. He came to understand that perfection was not achieved easily, and that success required both talent and tireless effort. These lessons, learned in the cramped living room and modest stages of Gary, became the core principles that guided him throughout his life. His childhood was not filled with toys and carefree afternoons, but with rehearsals, music, and the weight of responsibility. By the end of his first decade of life, Michael Jackson had already lived through experiences most adults never faced. He had discovered the power of his voice, the magic of performance, and the burden of expectations. He had begun a journey that would take him far beyond the steel mills of Gary and into a world stage that few could ever imagine. His childhood was marked by hardship, discipline, and sacrifice, but it was also the crucible in which his extraordinary talent was forged. The boy who once sang in a cramped living room with his brothers was already on the path to becoming a legend, even if he nor those around him fully realized it at the time.
As the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, the Jackson 5 rose from local sensations to international stars, and at the center of it all stood Michael, the youngest yet most magnetic presence in the group. The signing with Motown Records marked the true beginning of their ascent. The label, known for shaping raw talent into polished artistry, recognized Michael's unique gifts and placed him squarely at the forefront of the act. From the very first recordings, his voice carried a level of emotion and precision that stunned producers, and it became clear that he was not simply another child singer, but a rare phenomenon whose potential extended far beyond the confines of a family band. The release of their early singles catapulted the Jackson 5 into the spotlight with an intensity that few groups ever experienced. Songs like I Want You Back and ABC soared to the top of the charts, and audiences around the world were introduced to Michael's bright, youthful voice and his electrifying stage presence. He became a symbol of joy and energy, a performer whose every movement exuded charm and confidence. His smile, his ability to command a stage, and his instinctive sense of rhythm transformed each performance into an event. Fans were captivated, critics marveled, and the industry quickly realized it was witnessing the birth of a superstar. Behind the polished image lay an extraordinary amount of work. The schedule was grueling, with endless rehearsals, recording sessions, and tours that spanned continents. Michael, though still only a boy, endured the same demands as seasoned adults in the entertainment industry. Nights were spent on buses, days in studios, and weekends in front of screaming crowds. The cycle left little room for the normal experiences of childhood, yet Michael thrived in the spotlight, drawing energy from the adoration of fans. Still, the relentless pace took its toll, and fatigue often lingered just beneath his vibrant exterior. The stage, however, remained his sanctuary. Each time the Jackson 5 stepped out under the lights, Michael transformed. His movements were sharp yet fluid, his voice carried both innocence and maturity, and his charisma connected with audiences in a way that felt almost magical. Even among his talented brothers, his presence was undeniable. He had an innate ability to turn choreography into storytelling, to make each lyric resonate with meaning beyond its simplicity. It was this quality that made the Jackson 5 more than just another pop act. It made them cultural icons. As their fame spread, Michael became more than a singer. He became a face of possibility for countless children and families. To many, he represented the idea that talent and perseverance could break barriers of race, class, and circumstance. His performances on television brought him into living rooms across America, and his youthful exuberance contrasted sharply with the turbulent social climate of the era. He was seen as a beacon of hope, proof that joy and success could emerge from modest beginnings. Yet behind the applause and accolades, Michael felt the growing weight of expectation. The very qualities that made him shine also set him apart from his brothers, and he began to sense that his future would extend beyond the Jackson 5. He admired the legends of Motown and studied their artistry closely, analyzing how they moved, how they connected with crowds, how they conveyed emotion through song. He dreamed not only of singing, but of redefining what a performer could be. These ambitions sparked a restless energy within him, a desire to explore creative avenues that the structure of the family group could not always accommodate. Life on the road amplified these feelings. The constant travel and lack of stability made Michael yearn for something more personal, something that belonged solely to him. He missed the comforts of a regular childhood, yet he also envisioned a future where he could channel all his ideas without compromise. The tension between duty to the group and his own aspirations grew with each passing tour. While he loved his brothers and valued the unity that had propelled them to fame, he knew his artistry demanded more space than the group format could provide. The public, however, saw only the triumphs. They witnessed a boy with extraordinary talent leading one of the most successful pop groups of the era. Magazine covers, television appearances, and sold-out concerts cemented his status as a household name. The Jackson 5 were not just musicians, they were symbols of a new cultural moment, and Michael was its brightest star. The adoration was overwhelming, and the pressures were equally immense. Every note sung, every step danced, carried the burden of sustaining that image of perfection. Michael's response was to immerse himself deeper into his craft. He studied choreography relentlessly, experimented with vocal styles, and absorbed influences from across the musical spectrum. He sought to refine his abilities, not simply to meet expectations, but to surpass them. Even at such a young age, he understood that greatness was not achieved by talent alone, but by dedication and innovation. His drive separated him from his peers, and those around him sensed that his trajectory was destined to surpass even the extraordinary achievements already accomplished. By the end of the Jackson 5's initial wave of success, Michael Jackson had become far more than a child prodigy. He had established himself as a cultural force, a performer whose artistry resonated with audiences of all ages. His journey was still in its early stages, yet the signs of his future greatness were already visible. The boy who once stood in front of his brothers in local clubs was now captivating the world, and even though he remained tethered to the group, his ambitions whispered of horizons still to come.
The transition from being the star of a family act to an independent artist was not an easy one for Michael, but it was precisely in this stage of his life that his true strength revealed itself. As he stepped away from the shadows of his brothers and began to shape his own artistic identity, the challenges before him were immense. The music industry had little mercy for young artists, and the expectations for Michael were not only high, but nearly impossible. Yet he carried within him a relentless drive and a vision that extended far beyond what anyone could predict. He no longer wanted to be seen as the child prodigy of the Jackson 5. He sought recognition as an artist in his own right, one who could innovate, inspire, and lead. His breakthrough came with the release of Off the Wall in 1979. The album marked a turning point, blending pop, funk, and disco into a seamless sound that felt fresh and timeless. With the guidance of producer Quincy Jones, Michael began to explore his full creative potential, pushing his voice to new heights and his artistry to new dimensions. The album produced hits like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and Rock With You, songs that revealed a performer who was both joyous and sophisticated, capable of commanding dance floors while also capturing deeper emotional currents. Critics praised the record, and audiences around the world embraced it. For the first time, Michael stood alone at the center of the stage, not as part of a group, but as a singular force in music. The success of Off the Wall was immense, but Michael felt it was not enough. Despite selling millions of copies and earning accolades, he believed the industry had underestimated him. Awards were few compared to the record's impact, and in that perceived slight, Michael found motivation. He resolved to create something greater, something that could not be ignored, something that would redefine not only his career, but the possibilities of popular music itself. This determination set the stage for the creation of Thriller. Released in 1982, Thriller became more than an album, it became a cultural phenomenon. From the moment it appeared, it captivated the world with its innovation, energy, and sheer ambition. Each track seemed designed to push boundaries, from the driving beat of Billie Jean to the haunting atmosphere of the title track. Michael's vocal performances carried a rare combination of power and vulnerability, while the production shimmered with precision and creativity. Audiences across every continent were drawn into its orbit, and soon the album was breaking records at an unprecedented pace. What set Thriller apart was not only the music, but the way Michael understood the evolving role of visual media. He recognized that music videos could be more than promotional tools. They could be works of art in their own right. His short films for Billie Jean, Beat It, and especially Thriller itself changed the landscape of entertainment. These videos combined music with storytelling, choreography, and cinematic ambition in ways the world had never seen before. They did not simply accompany the songs, they expanded them, creating unforgettable cultural moments that blurred the lines between music and cinema. Michael's innovative approach also had a profound impact on the industry's structures. MTV, at the time criticized for its lack of diversity, began to broadcast his videos frequently, recognizing their popularity and cultural power. His presence on the channel opened doors for other Black artists, challenging long-standing barriers and reshaping the industry's landscape. In this way, Michael was not only advancing his own career, but also altering the opportunities available to others. He became a pioneer whose influence reached beyond music into the broader realms of media and representation. Concerts during this period reflected the enormity of his success. Stages around the world filled with fans eager to witness the spectacle of a Michael Jackson performance. Stadiums swelled with hundreds of thousands of people, their voices merging into a collective roar at the first glimpse of him on stage. His shows were more than concerts, they were events, complete with elaborate choreography, dazzling costumes, and moments of pure theatricality. When he introduced signature moves such as the moonwalk, they became instantly iconic, replicated by fans and admired by fellow performers. Michael's ability to command such vast audiences solidified his status as the King of Pop, a title that captured both his dominance and his innovation. Yet even as his fame soared to heights no artist had previously reached, shadows began to form. The very scale of his success created pressures that were difficult to bear. Every album, every performance, every public appearance was scrutinized and measured against impossibly high standards. The adulation that surrounded him often left little room for privacy, and the demands of constant touring and promotion were unrelenting. Michael, once a child longing for freedom from the confines of his family band, now found himself trapped within a different kind of cage, one built by fame and expectation. Despite the weight of these challenges, the period of Off the Wall and Thriller represented the pinnacle of his artistic ascent. Michael had transformed himself into a global phenomenon, a figure whose music crossed borders, languages, and cultures. He became not only a musician, but a symbol, embodying both the dreams and the contradictions of modern celebrity. The boy from Gary, Indiana, had not only fulfilled his promise, but had redefined what was possible in popular music. His rise to worldwide recognition was meteoric, and though it carried with it strains and isolation, it also established a legacy that would endure for generations.
The years that followed Michael's unprecedented rise were marked not only by triumphs,
but also by profound struggles that tested his resilience. At the height of his fame, he found himself surrounded by an ever-growing cloud of scrutiny. The world watched his every move, dissected every decision, and speculated endlessly about his private life. Fame, which had once seemed like the reward for years of hard work, became a double-edged sword that offered adoration on one side and relentless pressure on the other. One of the most visible aspects of this pressure centered on his physical appearance. Over the years, Michael's look began to change, and with every alteration came waves of speculation and rumor. Some claimed he was trying to escape his roots, while others suggested health issues or cosmetic procedures. Regardless of the truth, the narrative was largely controlled by tabloids, eager to feed the public's insatiable appetite for sensationalism. For Michael, his changing image was deeply personal, tied to both his struggles with vitiligo and his own insecurities. But the constant intrusion left him vulnerable. Instead of understanding, he faced judgment, and the scrutiny only deepened his sense of isolation. At the same time, his professional life demanded a perfectionism that consumed him. Michael poured enormous energy into his creative endeavors, obsessing over every detail of his albums, tours, and performances. He was not content with being good. He demanded greatness, both from himself and from those who worked with him. Rehearsals were grueling and preparations for shows were exhaustive, all aimed at delivering experiences that transcended ordinary entertainment. His tours grew into monumental productions, filled with elaborate stage designs, pyrotechnics, and choreography that pushed the boundaries of live performance. To the audience, the result appeared effortless, but behind the scenes, it was the product of relentless discipline and an unyielding pursuit of perfection. Yet this commitment came at a cost. The more he devoted himself to his art, the more his personal life slipped into turmoil. Friends and family often remarked on his growing loneliness, as the demands of his career left little room for rest or connection. The adoring crowds and thunderous applause could not fill the void that grew in the quiet moments when the stage lights dimmed. Michael, who had spent his childhood in the rigid structure of rehearsals and performances, found himself still trapped in a cycle of work that left him with little space to simply live. The pressures intensified further with the onset of legal challenges and public accusations. Allegations against him spread across headlines, casting shadows over his reputation and subjecting him to invasive investigations and grueling court proceedings. Regardless of outcomes, the damage to his image was significant, as the public began to view him not only as an entertainer, but also as a figure surrounded by controversy. The emotional toll of these trials was immense, shaking his trust in those around him and forcing him to confront the darker side of fame. The media played a pivotal role in magnifying his struggles. Every court date, every whispered rumor, every supposed revelation was amplified, often with little regard for truth or fairness. Journalists followed him relentlessly, capturing moments of vulnerability and framing them in ways that fueled public fascination. The narrative of his life was no longer fully his own. It had become a spectacle controlled by outsiders. For Michael, whose career had always been about control over music, over performance, over creative expression, this loss of agency was particularly painful. Despite the constant turmoil, his artistry did not falter. Even in the face of adversity, Michael continued to release albums that resonated with millions. His records during this time achieved staggering sales, breaking barriers and setting new standards in the industry. Songs carried a mix of defiance and vulnerability, reflecting both his battles and his enduring hope. His music became a refuge, a space where he could channel the chaos of his life into something transcendent. Fans across the globe remained loyal, seeing beyond the headlines and finding in his work the same inspiration and joy that had always defined his art. His concerts during these years bore the weight of both triumph and tragedy.
On stage, he transformed, pouring all of his energy into performances that dazzled audiences. It was in these moments that he seemed most alive, most connected, able to escape the storms that swirled around him. The stage was his sanctuary, a place where the judgment and noise of the outside world could not penetrate. He gave himself completely to the music, as though each performance was a statement that no scandal or struggle could silence his voice or diminish his talent. Still, the toll of these battles was undeniable. The isolation deepened, the demands grew heavier, and the weight of being both idolized and vilified left lasting scars. Yet within this crucible of fame and hardship, Michael's strength revealed itself. He endured, creating art that continued to inspire, even as his personal life unraveled. His ability to rise above the turmoil, to continue giving himself to his craft despite everything, became a testament to his resilience. The years of struggle and trial were not merely chapters of hardship, but defining moments that shaped his legacy. They revealed the fragility that lay beneath the image of the King of Pop, but they also underscored the power of his determination. For every headline that sought to diminish him, there was a song, a performance, or a gesture that reminded the world of his greatness. His journey during these times was not one of defeat, but of endurance, a demonstration that even in the face of relentless adversity, his artistry could not be silenced.
By the beginning of the 21st century, Michael Jackson remained one of the most recognizable figures in the world. His name still carried the aura of musical genius and cultural influence, yet it was also weighed down by controversy and speculation. To millions of fans, he was an enduring symbol of artistry, innovation, and inspiration. But to others, he had become a subject of constant criticism, surrounded by scandal and lingering questions about his personal life. This duality defined his late years, shaping the way the world perceived him and intensifying the struggle between his extraordinary achievements and the burdens that fame had imposed on him. Even as debates about his private choices dominated headlines, his presence on stage continued to draw immense crowds. Whenever he performed, stadiums filled with devoted admirers who were eager to witness the brilliance that had defined decades of popular music. His concerts, though less frequent than in his earlier years, still carried the same grandeur and magnetism that had long been associated with his artistry. Each show revealed the painstaking effort he invested in his craft, as he remained committed to creating experiences that blended music, dance, and spectacle. Yet behind the scenes, the toll of years under public scrutiny and relentless performance demands began to weigh heavily on him. In his personal life, Michael increasingly sought refuge in seclusion. He surrounded himself with his children, who became the center of his existence, offering him a sense of unconditional love and grounding that fame had long denied him. He also leaned on a small circle of trusted confidants, attempting to shield himself from the outside world's endless curiosity and judgment. His homes became sanctuaries where he could escape the intrusive gaze of cameras and the constant stream of speculation. Despite this retreat, he continued to dream of new creative projects, always envisioning a return to the stage that would reaffirm his legacy as the King of Pop. As he grew older, the contradictions within his life became more apparent. On one hand, he was celebrated for his unmatched contributions to music, his influence on generations of performers, and his philanthropic efforts. On the other hand, he was criticized for eccentric choices, financial troubles, and ongoing legal disputes. These conflicting perceptions made him a deeply polarizing figure, both admired and condemned, adored and scrutinized. His life had become a battleground of narratives, with supporters defending his genius and humanity, while detractors amplified his flaws and mistakes. The most ambitious attempt to reclaim his artistic dominance in his later years came with the announcement of his "This Is It" concert series. Designed as a grand return to the stage, the project was envisioned as both a farewell and a triumphant rebirth. The shows were to be held in London, with months of rehearsals and preparations planned to ensure that the production would surpass expectations. Fans from across the globe eagerly bought tickets, and the anticipation reached a fever pitch. For Michael, it was an opportunity to prove that, despite years of controversy, he still possessed the magic that had once captivated the entire world. However, behind the excitement, the strain was evident. Rehearsals were demanding, and Michael's perfectionism drove him to push himself harder than his health could sustain. He remained committed to every detail, working with choreographers, musicians, and stage designers to craft a show that embodied his vision of excellence. Yet behind the scenes, his body, worn down by years of relentless performing and the stress of constant public attention, began to falter. Fatigue and illness increasingly shadowed his efforts, forcing him to rely on medical assistance to maintain the stamina required for the production. The contrast between his determination and his declining health became one of the most poignant aspects of his late years. On stage and in rehearsal, he displayed flashes of the brilliance that had defined his career, the sharp dance moves, the commanding presence, the ability to electrify an audience with a single gesture. Offstage, he struggled with exhaustion, insomnia, and the pressures of preparing for what was intended to be the defining moment of his later life. The tension between his enduring artistry and his physical vulnerability revealed the high price of his lifelong pursuit of perfection. Financial difficulties further complicated his situation. Despite his immense wealth, decades of legal battles, extravagant spending, and declining record sales had eroded his fortune. The "This Is It" concerts were also seen as a necessary financial endeavor, aimed at stabilizing his circumstances and providing for his children's future. This added another layer of pressure, making success not only an artistic goal, but also a practical necessity. Michael understood the stakes and carried the weight of expectation not just for his fans, but for himself and his family. In these late years, Michael's legacy was both celebrated and questioned. He was honored with awards and tributes that acknowledged his contributions to music and culture, yet he also faced continued scrutiny that often overshadowed his accomplishments. The world seemed unable to separate the man from the myths, blending reality with rumor and painting his life in shades of both brilliance and tragedy. For Michael, the contradictions became an unavoidable part of his existence, shaping how he was remembered and how he saw himself. Despite the turbulence, his devotion to his children remained unwavering. He sought to provide them with a childhood far different from his own, filled with love, protection, and opportunities for growth away from the harsh spotlight. In them, he found renewed purpose, even as the challenges of his own life multiplied. They became his anchor, a source of strength during a time when the pressures of fame threatened to consume him entirely. His final chapter of his journey was marked by anticipation and fragility, as he stood on the brink of what could have been a defining resurgence. The promise of "This Is It" embodied both his hope for redemption and the heavy cost of his unrelenting pursuit of artistic perfection. His late years were not defined solely by decline or controversy, but by a complex interplay of genius and vulnerability, triumph and struggle, love and loneliness. In these contradictions lay the essence of Michael Jackson's humanity, a reminder that even the most extraordinary lives are fraught with imperfections.
In the summer of 2009, the world was shaken by the sudden news of Michael Jackson's passing. For decades, his name had been inseparable from music, performance, and global culture, and the announcement of his death reverberated across continents in a way few events in modern history ever had. Television networks interrupted programming, headlines dominated newspapers, and the internet surged with an outpouring of grief. It was not only the loss of an individual, but the symbolic end of an era that he had almost single-handedly defined. Michael's absence left a void that underscored just how deeply his art had penetrated the fabric of society. The days that followed were marked by collective mourning. From Los Angeles to London, from Tokyo to Rio de Janeiro, fans gathered in public squares, outside concert halls, and at impromptu memorials to honor his memory.
Candlelight vigils filled streets, murals appeared overnight, and strangers united through his music. His songs echoed across radios, television specials revisited his greatest performances, and for a brief moment, the divisions of the world seemed to fade, replaced by a shared recognition of what he had given. Michael Jackson's departure revealed the extraordinary reach of his influence. He had been more than a performer. He had been a cultural force capable of bridging nations, generations, and languages. His memorial service, broadcast globally, became one of the most watched events in history. Celebrities, dignitaries, musicians, and family members gathered to pay tribute, while millions around the globe tuned in. The atmosphere was filled with both sorrow and reverence, as the world reflected on the journey of a man who had risen from modest beginnings to shape the sound and vision of modern music. The sight of his golden casket and the collective grief of fans underscored the paradox of his life. He was a deeply human figure who had lived under an inhuman level of attention, scrutiny, and expectation. Beyond the grief, his passing sparked renewed interest in his work. Albums surged back to the top of charts, record-breaking sales returned, and his videos were streamed and replayed endlessly. Younger generations discovered his artistry anew, while older fans relived the moments that had defined their own youth. His music transcended time, proving its universality and timelessness. Songs like Billie Jean, Beat It, and Man in the Mirror were not just hits, they were cultural landmarks that continued to inspire. His influence was not confined to sound alone. The dance moves he pioneered, from the moonwalk to his intricate spins and sharp choreography, became part of the global lexicon of performance. Michael's legacy extended beyond entertainment. He had used his platform to address social issues, singing about unity, environmental awareness, and human compassion. Tracks such as Earth Song, Heal the World, and Black or White carried messages that resonated far deeper than the charts. These works reflected his belief that music could be a force for healing and change. His humanitarian efforts, often overshadowed by controversy during his life, came into clearer focus after his death. He had contributed to countless charities, supported hospitals, and visited children around the globe, demonstrating a commitment to using his fame for causes larger than himself. Yet his legacy was not free of complexity. The controversies and scandals that had surrounded him continued to provoke debate. Some sought to define him through the lens of accusation and eccentricity, while others emphasized the immeasurable joy he had given. This tension became part of the story of Michael Jackson, a man who embodied both genius and fragility, whose brilliance was accompanied by struggle, and whose humanity was often lost beneath the weight of myth. In this way, his legacy mirrored the contradictions of fame itself. In the years that followed his death, Michael's influence did not fade, but seemed to grow stronger. His estate managed his unreleased material, curated documentaries, and produced posthumous works that allowed audiences to glimpse pieces of his unfinished creativity. Productions like the This Is It documentary offered a poignant look at his final rehearsals, revealing the dedication and artistry that had defined him until his last days. These glimpses further cemented the image of the man who, even when worn by life, never abandoned his pursuit of perfection. Artists across genres continued to cite him as a primary influence. His innovations in music videos, stagecraft, and recording set standards that others still sought to reach. From pop stars to dancers, from filmmakers to visual artists, Michael's imprint was everywhere. His name became shorthand for ambition, reinvention, and boundary-breaking creativity. To emulate him was to aspire to greatness, and to honor him was to acknowledge the transformative power of art. His children, too, became carriers of his legacy, each in their own way keeping his memory alive. Through them, the world was reminded that Michael Jackson had been not only a performer, but also a father, striving to provide love and protection despite the chaos that surrounded him.
Their voices in the years after his passing added a personal dimension to his legacy, grounding the global icon in the reality of family bonds. As time passed, the collective memory of Michael Jackson settled into something larger than controversy, larger than fame. He became a symbol of what music could achieve, a unifying force that broke down racial barriers, reshaped entertainment, and gave voice to both joy and pain. His life illustrated the heights that talent and determination could reach, as well as the costs of living under the relentless spotlight. The world continued to dance to his rhythms, sing his lyrics, and marvel at the fusion of sound and movement he had perfected. Michael Jackson's departure was a tragedy, but his legacy became a triumph. He left behind not just records and performances, but an enduring reminder of art's capacity to inspire, to comfort, and to connect. In every beat of his music and every echo of his choreography, he remained alive in the cultural consciousness. His story was both extraordinary and cautionary, filled with triumphs and struggles, but ultimately it affirmed the power of creativity to shape history. Even in death, Michael Jackson continued to stand as the king of pop, a title not merely symbolic, but reflective of an influence that spanned decades and defied boundaries. His songs played at weddings, protests, and celebrations. His image adorned murals and tributes worldwide. His voice and moves lived on in those he inspired. The world would never again know a performer quite like him, and in that uniqueness lay the immortality of his legacy.